Want to hear something mind-blowing? Video games come out. I know, right? But some games are controversial, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes because a puddle doesn't look good. But it doesn't always happen where said controversy completely overshadows a new game. But then there are these. Sort of. I lied a bit in the title, as a good chunk of these games managed to do very well commercially and critically despite the controversies. And maybe they are not plagued by their respective controversy anymore, but either leading up to or on release, or shortly after release, these games came with baggage that impacted the game in one way or another. Maybe they still sold well, but always came with that baggage. Also, to make this more interesting, I'm not including any game that was controversial just because they were bad. I just don't think that's interesting at all, because this will just end up being a list of like Cyberpunk, No Man's Sky, Fallout 76, and I just decided to save you all the headache. These are more so outside circumstances that don't, or at least shouldn't, affect like the actual hands-on experience playing the game. But still baggage nonetheless, you know, and it came with each game that hasn't completely gone away. I hope all that made sense, because I tried my best for sure. But without further ado, let's get into it. Hi guys, DPX here, counting down the top 10 games overshadowed by controversy. Or sort of, you know what I mean. Before we get into this, you know what to do. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell if you comment, or I will overshadow you.
I wanted to give to you, in the last part of your notes here, the significance spiritually of the number 10 in the Bible.
Battlefield is a weird franchise. When the games are good, they are damn good, but the lows are super low. But no matter how low it gets, the franchise won't die, evident by the fact that 2042 was sort of a disaster with little hope of a new game anytime soon. But we are getting a new game really soon, with Battlefield 6 coming later this year. Let's go back to Battlefield 5. Leading up to release, there was a lot of controversy that overshadowed the release of the game, as the game was covering World War II, and on the cover was a woman. And before you start with, oh, it's gamers hating women, to be fair, that's not quite what this was. This was more about historical accuracy, or inaccuracy in this case, as people complained that women did not serve in World War II. Except they did. But to be fair, the adaptation of World War II, so to speak, was a bit questionable. This was coming off of the well-received Battlefield 1, which took place in World War I, obviously, and was a realistic interpretation of it. Battlefield 5 did take some liberties with World War II, but most of the conversation was about women in World War II, which again, you know, a quick Google search can easily disprove that. And EA's response, well, did not help matters. One sleeper hit indie game from a number of years ago was Dead Cells. A roguelike that I actually like this game? I don't really like roguelikes, but Dead Cells is such a good one, even I liked it. And so did YouTuber Boomstick Gaming. He made a very well-written and positive review of Dead Cells. However, just like a very short number of days later, Philip Mewson, a reviewer at the time for IGN, uploaded a review of Dead Cells onto the IGN YouTube channel, and it was suspiciously similar to Boomstick Gaming's review. It wasn't until Boomstick Gaming himself realized this and made a video pointing this out, and it was later discovered that Philip stole Boomstick Gaming's Dead Cells review. This then opened up a whole can of worms, as it was discovered that this wasn't Mewson's first time plagiarizing, just the first time he got caught. This led to Mewson being fired by IGN, the review being taken down, a statement including an apology to Boomstick Gaming issued by IGN, with a new review going up shortly after. Say what you want about IGN, I know it's fun to shit on them, but they handled this situation as perfectly as they could. All this kind of overshadowed the release of Dead Cells though, and that's why it's on the list. Although it might have actually helped Dead Cells in the long run, but still, at the time it was pretty overshadowed by this controversy. Rockstar Games are probably one of, if not the most well-respected game publisher in the industry, at least today. But they are not immune to controversy. I mean, look at pretty much every GTA game in existence, bound to get parents in the mainstream media up in arms. But Grand Theft Auto, and although it's not Rockstar, but, you know, as well as Call of Duty in this case, is a little too big to be overshadowed by controversy. Bully, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. What was the controversy with Bully? Well, of course, people had issues with its depiction of school violence and bullying, and people assumed it encourages bullying. And to play devil's advocate for a second, you are sort of asking for that misconception when you title the game Bully. However, if you do any amount of research, you'll actually learn that the game does not in fact encourage bullying. If anything, you actually stop the other bullies from doing the tormenting in your school. And sure, you can bully people in the game if you wanted to, but the game will actually punish you for it. Things got even worse when lawyer Jack Thompson, y'all remember that fucking goober, labeled the game as a Columbine simulator. Many games like Call of Duty and GTA come out and are controversial because think of the children, yada yada yada, you know, but they can overcome that because, like I said, those IPs are too big to be hindered by such controversies. Bully, not so much. It did eventually sell well, but it had this dark cloud around it for a while.
36.
Very close, but that's not it. Let's go to Gary the Retard. What number between 2 and 4?
7.
Stellar Blade was one of my favorite releases of last year. There is the obvious stuff that, I'll say, attracted me to get the game, but genuinely, the combat, boss fights, music, and world within the game kept me playing. But what was that obvious stuff I alluded to? Well, it's the main character, Eve, as, I'll just say it, she is very attractive, and that was controversial. People felt like Eve was being sexualized despite not really being the case within the context of the actual game. But on top of that, many journalists started hating on the game for this reason. One even going as far as to say that the game looks like it was designed by a man who has never seen a woman before. I could mention how stupid that is, but instead of doing that, I'm just going to show you a picture of the lead designer's wife. On top of that, Eve was modeled after a real person, and on top of that, people were saying all this before the game even came out. They were going off of the demo that released a little bit before the game did. Sorry if I seem a bit more miffed during this entry, but I always thought that this controversy was dumb, especially with how big it got. Stellar Blade did end up being very successful, as it later got a PC port and confirmation for a sequel, but when it was released, the discussion was not about the game.
Okay, Mrs. Puff, what's my final score?
6.
Woo! Bayonetta 3. Isn't it kind of weird that a very highly anticipated Switch release that we were waiting on for a while, that kept getting delayed over and over and over again, sort of just came and went? I thought the game was a perfectly fine action game, but definitely a step down from the prior two Bayonetta games. What's even crazier is that the drama with the VA for Bayonetta prior to this game probably had a bigger impact than the game itself. In case you're unaware, or maybe forgot because this was a while ago, as Bayonetta 3 was on the horizon, Helena Taylor, the voice actress for the Bayonetta character in the first two games along with the Smash Bros games, made a video claiming that she was offered $4,000 to come back and voice the character in the third game. This was after it was learned that Jennifer Hale, known for her voice work in many games along with many animated movies and shows, was the new voice of Bayonetta. On the surface, yeah, $4,000 for this is absurd, and since it was so close to the game's release, this was enough to overshadow the game. However, more information soon came out. Turns out Helena Taylor left out some crucial information. Specifically, she was originally offered $10,000, then was offered an additional $5,000, turned it down, then was offered $4,000 to voice a smaller role. So basically, she lied by omission. And maybe you want to say that $15K is still low, and maybe it is, but she hadn't done a whole lot of voice work since Bayonetta 2. But either way, this was just a big mess.
Chills. Literal chills.
It was number 5. Number 5 killed my brother.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
The Nintendo Switch 2 launched a few months ago, and I think it's a really solid piece of hardware, especially when looking at it in comparison to Switch 1 in terms of power and features. And the big launch title for the Nintendo Switch 2 was Mario Kart World for $80. Yeah, I don't really need to give you all the rundown for this controversy, as A, it's pretty recent, And B, there's not much to really explain. It's just that the game was $80, which was very shocking to see from Nintendo, who has in more recent years been the more budget-friendly brand. Although Mario Kart World is definitely content-filled, feature-rich, and very technically impressive, none of this seemed to have warranted the jump to $80. This led to concerns of a precedent being set, and soon after, Microsoft announced that their upcoming The Outer Worlds 2 would be $80, with many people pointing at Nintendo for the cause of Microsoft's decision, regardless of how true that statement really is. And it is worth noting that Microsoft eventually pivoted and lowered the price of Outer Worlds 2 back to $70. So maybe this precedent that Nintendo may have set might be a bit in question, at least for now, but the fact of the matter is, no matter how good Mario Kart World is, that $80 price tag will always be a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. Something that keeps popping into my brain very sporadically is when a few years ago, there was a PlayStation State of Play, and they revealed this game called Aeon Must Die. It was this admittedly really cool looking futuristic action beat 'em up that was visually and aesthetically stunning. But nobody cared because right when this game was announced, it was already in question. There was a reveal trailer released for the game, obviously, on the PlayStation YouTube channel, but then another version of the trailer released labeled as Official Version on a channel called Erky Poots. Yeah, very funny name, but in the description, it reads, "This trailer was created with abuse, manipulation, and theft. People who have worked on every shot of this are no longer with the company holding IP rights. Some were not even paid for their work. This trailer has a pending conflict of IP. The real IP for the game was stolen from the creators via foul play. Final reaction of the publisher to this information remains to be seen." And when you read more into what happened, you learn that the game was essentially stolen from its developers. Aeon Must Die did eventually come out, but when it did, you could hear a pin drop. Luckily for the developers that were screwed over for this game, went on and formed their own studio, Mishura Games, with their own game Immortal and the Death That Follows, which was basically a remake of Aeon Must Die, and was received very well, so a happy ending at least. Wanna know what's crazy? A brand new Assassin's Creed game came out earlier this year, and I constantly forget about that. Now, I personally don't really like Assassin's Creed that much. It's actually one of my biggest gaming hot takes, but I really think that there is one, maybe two games in the franchise worth playing. But that aside, Assassin's Creed Shadows was the game where this franchise finally goes to Japan, something fans have been asking for many years, but instead, oh boy. Most of the controversy boils down to the main character, Yasuke, being black. Now, before you say it's a bunch of right-wing grifters, which to be fair isn't entirely false, it is worth pointing out that there were some actual Japanese people upset about this, saying that they wanted an Assassin's Creed game in Japan for a while, and to finally get one just to not have the main character be Asian was a little disappointing. I can understand that perspective, although Yasuke was a real person who actually existed in feudal Japan, and there was another playable character, Naoe, who was actually Japanese. But Ubisoft did not help matters when putting out a trailer showing off the combat for Yasuke with a hip-hop beat in the background as music. Not to mention, there were many reports about the game not being too good, to where they had to delay it multiple times, but the crazy thing is, it came out and was apparently decent. Didn't seem to light the world on fire, but it seemed like a competent enough Assassin's Creed game. But I'm sure all anyone is going to remember is the pre-release chatter surrounding the game.
What kind of pencil do we take again?
Number 2. Take a number 2.
Looks like you took a big number 2.
Okay, so I have to be very careful with how I talk about this next one, but Hogwarts Legacy. When that game came out, it became the first game since 2008 to be the best-selling game of the particular year it was released, to not be a Call of Duty game or a game from Rockstar. So with that being said, the controversy around the game's release definitely didn't impact the game too much in terms of sales, but it was big enough to where it should be on this list, and this high nonetheless. And that said controversy pertains to J.K. Rowling, who at one point said, to say the least, some very questionable things about trans people. People called for a boycott, and honestly, if it stopped at that, this controversy probably wouldn't have blown up so much. What happened after that, though, was that it started a bit of a culture war. If you got the game, you were apparently transphobic and directly supporting J.K. Rowling. It's not to say that you weren't reasonable for not supporting the game, but for the people harassing and sending death threats to those who just wanted to play a game in the wizarding world was diabolical. There was even a website that helped harass people who were streaming the game. That's how out of hand this got. Hogwarts Legacy kinda transcended gaming. This game became a political debate, and even non-gamers were either discussing it or would refuse because doing so would result in harassment. This would have been number one, but the fact that it sold as well as it did and even broke some insane records is enough to keep it away from that top spot. But that discussion around this game, yeesh.
I'm a Luigi, number one.
Imagine, if you will, you've been working on the highly anticipated sequel to the highly acclaimed video game, The Last of Us. Do you already see where I'm going with this? I'll just keep going just in case. The game faces many delays just to get the game, and in this case, the story on point, putting blood, sweat, and tears into it for years, to the point where there is a significant amount of crunch within the studio. And then one day some guy leaks the entire story online and everyone hates it. Okay, I don't know if I can 100% blame the divisiveness of The Last of Us Part 2 on the leaks, but no way it did not have a factor into how people's opinion on the story was. There are some truly shocking things that happen in the story of The Last of Us Part 2, many of which are criticized for being shocking just for the sake of shock value. Regardless of your opinion on that, those moments in the game were intended to be experienced while playing. They were certainly not meant to be experienced the way most people did. This controversy, along with other baseless controversy that isn't even worth mentioning, really overshadowed the release of this game. And even if you did eventually experience the events in the story with more context, finding out about such huge moments through a leak is sure to sour people on said moments, regardless of how well executed they were in the game. The Last of Us Part 2 sold very well and got some critical acclaim from critics. There were people being overly harsh on the game, sure, because The Last of Us Part 2 became a fun game to hate on, but there were many gamers who genuinely felt like the story did not work. Would the reception be different had they experienced these moments the way they were meant to be experienced? Who knows for sure, but this controversy still plagues The Last of Us Part 2 in one way or another, and I think it is a big factor into why this game is such a divisive topic, even to this day, and that is why it comes in at number 1. So that's my list of the top 10 games overshadowed by controversy, although I said it sort of is, but you know what I mean. What do you guys think of this? Is there any game I left out? Let me know down below. Anyways, be sure to like the video, comment, subscribe, or I will overshadow you.